The film opens at Gen-Sys, a pharmaceutical business specializing in genetic therapy. A female ape, Terry Notary, assigned number 9 and dubbed Bright Eyes by the staff, has been given the medicine ALZ-112 and has shown significant improvement. She is more friendly and peaceful than other primates, and she has completed the Towers of Hanoi puzzle in 20 moves, close to a perfect score of 15. Will Rodman, James Franco, meets with his supervisor, Steve Jacobs, David Oyelowo, and convinces him that he has enough evidence to start human trials for the drug. Rodman and Jacobs appear before the board of directors the following day in the Gen-Sys conference room. Will says that the new medicine induces neurogenesis, or the formation of new brain cells, which does not normally occur after birth, and that it has the potential to treat a variety of degenerative brain conditions such as Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. The only adverse effect of the medicine is that subjects exposed to it have a green shine in their eyes. Back in the lab, Robert Franklin, Tyler Labini, the senior monkey carer, is having difficulty persuading Bright Eyes out of her cage. She is violent towards Robert and the other volunteers. They use orange soda to entice her out of the cage, but when they try to wrangle her with a lasso pole, she goes ape and runs amok through the building. The chase comes to an end when she crashes through the glass window of the conference room and is killed by the building's security officers. Fearing that what they saw with Bright Eyes was a drug-induced violent adverse effect, Jacobs declares the drug experiment dead. Will tries to persuade Jacobs to reconsider his mind, but Jacobs refuses, claiming he wants the remaining test apes put down. When Robert returns to the lab, he shows Will a newborn ape hiding in Bright Eyes' cell. This explains why their presumption was incorrect. Bright Eyes was acting violently to defend her infant, not because of the medicine. Will is given the responsibility because Robert does not have the heart to put down the infant. He decides to take the infant home because he is unwilling to do so. Will goes home to live with his father, Charles, John Lithgow. Charles has Alzheimer's disease and requires a nursing care when Will is not present. Will shows Charles the newborn ape, who immediately takes a fancy to it. Charles mockingly refers to the baby as Caesar, alluding to his admiration of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar. Caesar quickly demonstrates remarkable development, being able to feed himself after only 2 days. He appears to have inherited the virus-based ALZ-112 from his mother. His temporary stay with Will lasts 3 years, and Will creates a place for him in the attic. Though ape-like in certain aspects, Caesar, Andy Serkis, now half-grown, is a cherished part of the family and demonstrates considerable intelligence, articulating complicated thoughts with sign language. While Caesar is improving mentally, Charles's Alzheimer's disease is worsening, and he has an argument with his nurse. Will takes a significant risk by stealing ALZ-112 from Gen-Sys. He administers a dose to Charles, and the next day, Will discovers his father sitting at the piano, playing flawlessly. Meanwhile, Caesar has gotten bored with watching their neighbors play outdoors and escapes through the window into their neighbor's backyard. His appearance, however, frightens the neighbor's girl, and her father, Hunziker, David Hewlett, strikes Caesar fiercely. Will and Charles successfully rescue Caesar, but not before Hunziker injures him. Will smuggles Caesar into a zoo for medical care. Caroline Aranya, Frida Pinto, is a veterinarian who treats Caesar there. Caroline is impressed by Caesar's command of sign language during the process. He even suggests that Will and Caroline go out to dinner through sign language. To satisfy Caesar's restlessness, they transport him across the Golden Gate Bridge to a redwood grove for some outdoor fun. When Caesar arrives at the woodland, he does not leave Will, but instead makes a supplication gesture of extending his arm, palm up, asking for permission to play. Will agrees, and Caesar climbs into the trees. Caroline is now a member of the Rodman family, and Caesar has grown up. Will has even begun to outfit him in a shirt and trousers. A dog snarled viciously at Caesar on a visit to the forest, and he responds with a primal yell that scares it away. Will senses Caesar's sadness and confusion over who he is. They drive by Genesis, and will tell Caesar about the medicine that made him smarter, as well as his mother's death. Charles's condition has deteriorated in the 5 years since he was administered ALZ-112. Will believes that because his immune system has produced antibodies, a more aggressive virus is required. Will takes a risk by visiting Jacobs, disclosing his father's secret experiment, and explaining that the medicine not only cures brain damage but also makes people smarter. He claims to have altered the virus and requires Jacobs' approval for additional animal trials. Charles becomes disoriented at home and wanders outdoors, into their neighbor's automobile. He tries to drive it, but he damages it. Hunziker, the same neighbor who attacked Caesar, yanks Charles from the car. In his insane state, Charles is unable to explain why he is there. Caesar observes this from his attic window, and when he sees the neighbor cursing and aggressively pushing Charles, he hurries out of the home. He assaults Hunziker, tossing him to the ground, leaping on him, punching him, and finally biting off a finger. "Caesar, no," shouts Charles, recognizing Caesar. Caesar retreats and turns to Charles. Caesar is brought to a primate sanctuary by animal control as a result of the event. Will and Caroline greet him and bid him farewell. The sanctuary is difficult for Caesar in his early days. It is run by John Landon, Brian Cox, with his short-tempered and aggressive son Dodge, Tom Felton, and a frightened man named Rodney, Jamie Harris, in charge of the animals. When Caesar hurls his food at Dodge and laughs, the young man lashes out with a fire hose, driving a scared Caesar into a corner of his cage. When Caesar is released with the other animals into the main play area, he meets the group's dominant male, an ape named Rocket, also Terry Notary. Rocket rips Caesar's shirt off and beats him. Caesar also notices a gorilla named Buck, Richard Ridings, in a confined cage and an orangutan who speaks sign language across from his cage. Caesar begins to interact quietly with the orangutan, Maurice, Karen Conoval. The sanctuary sends 12 apes to Genesis to test the improved form of ALZ-112, known as ALZ-113. Will is in charge of the testing once more, and his first subject is a harried ape named Koba, Christopher Gordon. Koba is restrained and given the new medicine via a breathing mask. Koba, on the other hand, resists and the hose falls off the machine. Except for Robert, who is accidentally exposed, almost everyone in the lab is wearing breathing masks. Will takes some of the ALZ-113 home that night to cure his father. Charles declines the medicine and dies in his sleep that night. Will notices a copy of Julius Caesar after Will and Caroline finish packing away the rest of Charles's stuff. Dodge later leads some of his pals into the sanctuary's cage section, where Caesar steals a pocket knife from one of the guests. Caesar meets Buck, a big gorilla in the yard who is never let out of his cage, by letting him out. He then lets go of Rocket, who ventures into the garden. Caesar smacks him across the face with a steel petrol can. Rocket is prepared to fight, but realizes Buck is loyal to Caesar and will protect him, so he surrenders. Caesar is currently the dominant male. Later, Caesar lets Rocket out of the cage area and allows him to distribute stolen cookies, from Dodge, to each monkey, bringing the group together. Caesar has also discovered a path and controls leading to the windowed enclosure at the top of the play area. Will returns to work to see that Jacobs has shamelessly and dangerously accelerated the research timeline. While Jacobs is preoccupied with economic gains, Wood tells him that the most pressing issue they must address is how the newer ALZ-113 would harm humans. Will leaves Genesis as Jacobs refuses to listen to his warnings. Meanwhile, Robert has been experiencing adverse effects from his virus exposure, such as sneezing that generates blood droplets from his sinuses. Will returns to the monkey sanctuary to cajole John Landon into giving him Caesar. John is willing to leave, but when Will persuades Caesar to accompany him, Caesar refuses. Caesar escapes via the window he discovered that evening and returns home. He grabs ALZ-113 from Rodman's refrigerator and distributes it to the preserve's apes. The next day, John Landon notices the apes holding a conference. The apes scatter and play it off. Landon dismisses it as something strange. The apes are returning to their cages that night, but Caesar refuses, confronting and defeating Dodge in the yard. Dodge exclaims when he is grabbed, "Take your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape." For the first time, Caesar shouts, audibly, "No." The second caretaker is a witness and rushes into the cage area, attempting to save Dodge, who is now comatose. The apes assault him, but Caesar disperses them and, in a gesture of kindness, places him in Caesar's cage. Dodge tries to flee and is slain. He has a cattle prod in his hand, and Caesar hits him with the fire hose. Will phones Caesar before dawn but receives no response. He drives over to investigate and discovers the facilities destroyed, the apes missing, and the ALZ-113 canisters open in the cage sections. He makes the decision to sound the alarm. Meanwhile, the apes are marching across town. Caesar segregates them into two groups. Buck leads one party to the zoo to free the apes, while Caesar leads the other group to Genesis. Robert goes to Will's house to talk to him, but Will isn't there, and Robert is confronted by Hunziker, Will's short-tempered neighbor. Robert sneezes on him, startled. Later, a woman in Robert's building discovers his death. The news of the ape escape is delivered to Jacobs, who has just arrived at work. He discovers that Caesar and the other apes have taken control of the building and liberated the 12 ALZ-113 test subjects. The cops have been summoned. Jacobs boards a police helicopter as Caesar and Buck's groups join forces, bringing the total number of chimps, orangutans, and gorillas to 50 to 60. The apes, on the other hand, appear to be deliberately preventing the deaths of people they encounter. Will and Caroline had heard about the rampage, and after learning that the apes are on their way to the Golden Gate Bridge, they believe Caesar is leading them to the Redwood Grove. The officers are on the bridge, ready to fire on the apes, but Caesar separates his forces once more. To get through the roadblock, one group climbs the suspension cables, while another swings from the structure's underbelly. In the chopper, Jacob spots Caesar and instructs the men to shoot at him, assuming that killing Caesar will put an end to the others. Buck, however, dives aboard the chopper as it approaches the bridge, bringing it down at the expense of his own life. Caesar is saddened by the loss of his colleague and soon discovers the wreckage of the helicopter clinging to the side of the bridge, with Jacobs crying for rescue. Instead, Caesar turns aside, and Koba rams the helicopter into the ocean, killing Jacobs. The apes continue into the jungle. Meanwhile, Will and Caroline have made their way to the bridge. Will grabs a police car and drives off into the woods. He yells Caesar's name, but is interrupted by one of his men. Caesar, on the other hand, emerges quickly, and the others retreat. Will tries to reconcile with his friend, vowing to protect him if Caesar comes home with him. Will is taken aback when Caesar holds him tight and whispers, "Caesar is home." Will observes Caesar and several other apes as they ascend into the trees to view the jungle, and the world beyond. Will's neighbor Hunziker reports for duty as a pilot at San Francisco International Airport in the aftermath. He notices that he is bleeding from his nose as he gets to his plane. As the camera pans up, we see the digital boards flashing to various locations, a sign that these locations will soon be infected with ALZ-113, sealing humanity's fate. The TV and press stories of a troubled human Mars probe named Icarus becoming lost in space are a recurring subplot throughout the film. What will the astronauts discover when they return?